Last week we started to talk about, in fact, we spent the entire conversation last week speaking about the oath that the neshama is administered before we come into this world. The oath that you will be a tzadik and that you will not be a rasha. And the question we had last week, we had a number of questions. How can you take an oath about something that you don't know anything about? But the key question that we're focused on at this part of the chapter is, why do we need the double oath? Tell people what you want of them and create that aspiration. And then, what's the old expression? I don't know. To me, it makes no sense. What's this one that they say? If you aim for the moon, but you don't hit it, at least you'll hit the stars or something like that. Yeah. To me, it makes no sense. And the stars are way beyond the moon. But it's the same notion, right? So create a high-level aspiration, and then even if we don't reach that aspiration, at least we'll have improved, we'll have grown, something will have happened. So tell people, be a tzaddik. That's great. It's a good carrot. It's a good ideal. And if you don't get there, okay, so at least you'll have achieved something. At least you'll have grown something.
Human nature, like, if I don't achieve something, then I'm not doing anything.
Okay, so you're saying that human nature is such that we become zero-sum game people. Yeah. And you need to manage that. But I don't think that's what he's saying over
It's
here.
got a weird thing because it's like a 99.9% failure rate on this.
That's what we spoke about last week, right?
Sorry.
So
99.99.
and we'll still talk about it still this week as well. But the question really is over here, why do you have to have the two elements to this oath? Because if you are going to say, and I'll pick up on that point, if you are going to say that there's a 99.9999% chance that you're not going to be a tzaddik, which is the information that we have so far, then why even put it into the deal? That's not helpful, because you don't have a measure for what a Beinoni is. So that's not going to be helpful, just because that's effectively telling somebody just be average. That's how people are going to interpret it. Okay, he's telling me to be average. That's not going to cut it. But the question is, why is it built into this deal that we made before we were born, that to hit tzaddik, that part of the deal is that you're going to be a tzaddik? Why is that even on the cards? Say be okay. Say that you're going to be the best version of who you could be. Something like that. Why specifically a tzaddik on the one hand, and why specifically and not a rasha on the other hand? Okay, that's effectively what we're going to unpack. So I'm going to go back to the beginning of the sentence, even though we did it last week, because you need that for the flow. It's on page 62, and if you look at page 62, you can see that there's a whole new section that begins over there with the words uvazeh. So it's very easy to identify because it's a new section. And that's what we're going to go back to, is that beginning of that section. Uvazeh yuvan keifa l'shoina shavua, with the information that we've got so far. What's the information that we've got so far? The information is that to become a Beinoni basically means that what you've got to do is you've got to really work on self-control. That's the key of being a Beinoni. A Beinoni has choices. A Beinoni also has temptations. But the Beinoni has the choice not to fall victim to those temptations. So just remember, it's the page numbers at the bottom of the page. That often confuses people. So page 62, bottom of the page, we're looking at this new section. So what have we learned so far? We've learned that to be a tzaddik, that is what's called davar hamasir lelev. The tzaddik has control not only over how they behave, how they conduct themselves, but the tzaddik even has control over what kind of feelings run through their system. So that's why the tzaddik is not going to have the same kind of distractions and temptations that we have. Whereas a Beinoni has similar experiences to us, in the sense that the Beinoni sometimes does feel the fleeting temptation, but then knows how to manage it. So with that in mind, we said we understand why the Beinoni is an accessible goal for every human being, or at least for every one of us, because every one of us is capable of self-control. We may not like to have self-control, but we're capable of self-control. Whereas what the tzaddik is all about is beyond us. So with that information, now we can understand Keifa l'shoina shavua, why the oath that was administered before birth has a double clause to it. Tehi tzaddik, the first clause is be a tzaddik, aspire to a tzaddik status. That should be your goal. And then the second clause is ve al tehi rasha, and don't be a rasha. Now that's interesting. It doesn't say at least don't be a rasha. That's how we'd do it. If we were negotiating a deal, we'd say something like that. Be the best that you could be. If you can't be the best, at least don't let the team down. Like, that's the kind of language we'd use. But that's not what it's saying. In fact, if you want to look at this just a little bit more subtly for 1 second, one thing that we know in Judaism is that the expression ve implies two things that are both valid or both applicable. When you say this and that, you're implying that they're both relevant. If I say this or that, okay, then I'm saying you got to choose an option. So tehi tzadik, either be a tzadik, or at the very least, don't be a rasha. That's not what it's saying here. It's saying tehi tzadik, be a tzadik, and al tehi rasha, don't be a rasha. What kind of language is that? Surely it's self-evident. Exactly. Surely if I'm a tzaddik, obviously I'm not a rasha. What do you mean? And in addition, simultaneously, while you're being a tzaddik, and don't be a rasha. It's strange, right? How's it understandable?
Because it's like mitzvahs, right? There's avoidable and what you should do. So
right.
You could avoid being bad, but doesn't necessarily propel you into the good.
Fine. So then they're not simultaneous.
Like,
then you can't be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha. Then you should say again, like I said, be a tzaddik. If that fails, don't be a rasha. Not be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha. Why are they two in the same breath?
Because of also intention. Like, don't do something for the wrong reason, right? So you still, even though you have that fake it till you make it, even if you don't understand the mitzvah. But if you do a mitzvah and it's out of, like, you'll get something out of it, it can change that whole mitzvah into.
But where do you see intention in here? In this sentence, where do you see intention? It says be this and don't be that. It doesn't say intend when you're being this. Intend. That's not what it says. It says be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha.
Maybe it's talking to two different people.
How could it be talking to two different people? It's the oath that you were given before you were born. It's talking to you, unless you feel you have a split personality, in which case maybe we're speaking to two different people. But, right, it's saying, be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha. Let me help you out of here. None of us are going to guess it.
It's also to strive, right? So you strive.
Again, if you're telling me to strive, then you're telling me be a tzaddik. And if you don't make it, at the very least, don't be a rasha. That would be to strive. It's not what he's saying. He's saying be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha.
But if you don't succeed at being a tzaddik, don't think that you have failed. And therefore, by failing,
Again, if you're saying don't feel that you have failed, then the line is be a tzaddik. That's the benchmark. And if that doesn't work out for you, second best is don't be a rasha.
So it's throwing bait on the enemy.
If you can't be a rasha, then just abhor the evil.
Okay, so now you're speaking about intention again, right? That you have to abhor that which is evil. It's not what it's saying over here. It's not saying what you should feel, it's saying what you should be. So we need to understand this, right?
I think it's being disrespectful
And
to a tzaddik to say.
okay, why is it disrespectful to the tzaddik?
Because the tzaddik would never
We never do bad. So why is it disrespectful then? He's saying, be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha. That's great for a tzaddik. Obviously, if I'm a tzaddik, I'm not a rasha. So we've got to understand what's going on over here. And he's telling us we've already got the information based on what we've studied. Because it says, Uvazeh Yuvan. Based on what we've studied up until this point, we can now understand this question, the answer to this question, which means we have the necessary information. So we've got to go back and dig into what we've already learned and understand this information. So first he explains more clearly the question. It seems very strange. Once they've designed this oath, this deal, this commitment, this contract, to say, be a tzaddik, why do I have to include in this contract, in this, so to speak, deal between us and Hashem, also the expression, Sheloi yiyeh rasha? Why do you have to say both? You made a deal with me. Tehi tzadik. Do you agree to this? Because that's what happens, right? Before your neshama comes down into the world, we say, do you take this oath? And by the way, I think reading between the lines, the implication is, if you don't take the oath, they don't send you down here. Right? So, well, that's what it says. Before you were born, that's what they take it up. So if you don't take the oath, they don't send you down.
The result is a bad one.
What do you mean the result? What does it mean the result?
You're in the middle.
Hey?
Could it have something to do with, like, your neshama and your yetzirah, not necessarily the human aspect?
Okay, but there's no yetzirah there in heaven.
Yes.
So the
Neshama
oath
can
is
only be a
administered to your neshama. The oath is administered to your neshama. Your neshama can only be a tzaddik. I don't know if that's accurate. Don't know if that's accurate, that your neshama can only be a tzaddik. I don't know if that's accurate. I'm not saying yes or no, but I don't know if that's accurate. Okay? Is your neshama aligned with what Hashem wants? Yes. Is that the definition of a tzaddik? No. A tzaddik has to have the experience of the human, otherwise what's a tzaddik? In other words, if there is no temptation, distraction, allure, then you're not a tzaddik. In other words, just to put it differently, is an angel a tzaddik? No. Why is an angel not a tzaddik?
Doesn't have anything.
Because it doesn't have an alternative. So therefore, a neshama in heaven is not a tzaddik. How is it a tzaddik? A tzaddik is a measure of human growth, achievement, or spiritual status. You can't be a tzaddik in heaven. There's no such concept. You could be a tzaddik when you return to heaven.
Is it something to do with free choice?
No. No. We're going to have the topic of choice will be part of this conversation. It will be part of this conversation. But this is not a matter of choice. In fact, it may even be almost the opposite, as we shall see. But free choice is going to be part of this conversation. So we need to understand, why is it that you are made before you are born to take an oath, tehi tzaddik, that you will be a tzaddik, and al tehi rasha, and you will not be a rasha. This is such a fascinating perspective. So he explains to us, Elo, mishum she'ein kol adam zoiche liyois tzaddik. Now we've already touched on this. You all said it here this evening. 99.999 recurring % of people will never be a tzaddik, which maybe around this table makes everybody feel a little bit better, because you can say, phew, at least I know I'm not letting the team down because I'm not going to be a tzaddik. And that's what he says over here. Ein kol adam zoiche liyois tzaddik. Not every person reaches, and the word he uses over here is zoiche. Not every tzaddik has the merit, sorry, not every person has the merit to become a tzaddik. What does it mean, the merit? It means it's not really up to you.
So
it's not really up to you. It's a schus, it's a merit.
If Hashem decides that you're a tzaddik, right, then that's what you will be.
No. Don't jump the gun. No. Don't jump the gun on that. Don't jump the gun. Let's work it through before we try to work out what you think he's going to say. Let's see what he actually says. Okay? So let's read. Let's work it through. And mishum she'ein kol adam zoiche liyois tzaddik. Not every person merits to be a tzaddik. The emphasis over here is on the word merits rather than the word earns. Not everybody earns the rights to be a tzaddik. It's not saying that. Not everybody merits to be a tzaddik. The implication of a merit is that some kind of a gift or opportunity that is given to you, that, again, it's an opportunity. Nobody makes you into a tzaddik. Nobody makes you into a tzaddik. But you're given that opportunity, you're given that right, you're given that merit to be a tzaddik, and not everybody is given that merit. Even a person who, as we discussed previously, is at the level of Adam, who's a very advanced human being and done a lot of spiritual development, etc., doesn't necessarily mean that they have access to become a tzaddik. Here comes the part about choice, and it's not what you thought.
I wanted to ask.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Are you then saying that not everyone then is so-called privileged to be a tzaddik? Does that mean when you're born, your soul is different?
So again, let's wait. He's going to unpack it for us. So let's wait while I'll unpack it. Okay. So let's have a look.
Sorry.
So what does he say? This is the critical part of this conversation around choice, which is going to be the linchpin of understanding what's going on over here. Ve'ein la'adam mishpat habechira bozeh kol kach. The choice that humans are given is not available to the same extent in this area. It doesn't say there's no choice. It doesn't say there's no choice. The choice of what it takes to become a tzaddik is not kol kach, is not so available, it's not so accessible to people. Why not? Why not? Because in order to be a tzaddik, as we have already learned, remember it says of Azeh Yuvan, we already have this information. So let's remind ourselves, what does it mean to be a tzaddik? What is the distinction between being an ordinary person, even a Beinoni, versus being a tzaddik? There's a key distinction between them. Doesn't have the thoughts to do bad. Why not? That's correct. Why not? Why does he not have the thought to do
Everything
bad?
he does is for good.
Why?
And the soul's completely.
He's aligned.
Why?
Like a vessel.
Why? We have this information. We had this information in this chapter. He's what?
He abhorred
Yeah, he detests evil.
Because he abhors evil. Correct.
And wants to
And
do
why
God's
does he
will.
abhor evil? This is a key
Wants
part.
to do God's will.
No, so does a Benoni want to do God's will. That's not the unique selling point of a tzaddik. It's not that he wants to do God's will. It's that he hates evil. He detests evil. Why does he detest evil? This is key information that we learned. That what?
He knows what it does to the soul.
He knows what it. So I also know what it does to the soul to a greater or less extent. Doesn't make me hate it. People who smoke know what the cigarette does to their lungs. Doesn't stop them smoking. It's not good enough. It's not good enough to have knowledge. Knowledge is not good enough. He detests evil. Why does he detest evil? So he tells us over here, Lehisaneg al Hashem be'emes. Because the core of a tzaddik is that the tzaddik's joy, pleasure in life comes from Hashem. That is the distinction between a tzaddik and every other kind of human. And we've said there are many kinds of humans. We've given a whole array. We've spoken about the tzaddik, the chassid, the Ovdei Hashem in this particular way, in that particular way. What's unique about a tzaddik is that their joy and pleasure in life comes from Hashem. Not comes from Hashem as in Hashem gives them joy. Our joy and pleasure comes from good food, a nice holiday, nice clothing. That's where our joy and pleasure comes from. That's why we're susceptible. That's why we're susceptible. In other words, let's step out of this conversation for one moment. Why do people fall for scams? You ever thought about this? Why do people fall for scams?
They're dumb.
Gullible.
No.
They want
No.
To, they want to believe that.
They want to believe, but why? What's the fundamental reason that a person is susceptible to a scam?
The prize.
The prize.
What they're going to
The
get.
prize, exactly. Now, if I came to you and said, listen, I met this guy, he's a Nigerian prince, and he's got this incredible opportunity. If you get involved in this opportunity, you will get 1 million cockroaches. Is there any chance in the world you'd ever go for that scam? No. Why not? Because you have absolutely nothing that about cockroaches that is attractive to you. To the contrary, they're absolutely repulsive. So the worst thing you tell me is I'm going to get more cockroaches. I spent my whole life trying to get rid of them. Now you're telling me I have a deal that you're going to get cockroaches. So why are we susceptible to scams? Because the allure, like you say, the prize. The allure of every scam is that it's speaking to something that they know we not only want, but that gives us pleasure. And that's why our brain wants us to believe we'll be able to get this stuff. So any scam, whether it is an outright scam like the Nigerian prince, or whether it's less of a scam like somebody telling you if you have this particular product, it's going to do this and that for you. So it might be true, might not be true. Why do people buy the stuff? Why do people believe the stuff? Why do people swear by the stuff? Because ultimately, what drives our pleasure is X and Y. We want to have more money. We want to live an easier life, a comfortable life, a longer life. So because you're speaking to what I enjoy, you can sell me a boat. But if it's something I don't have any tainug, I don't have any pleasure, there's no way in the world you'll ever sell it to me. Not in my million lifetimes. Because it means nothing to me. So what makes us susceptible to behaviors or choices that are not in our own interest or that are not spiritually or even physically healthy for us? What makes us susceptible is that what lies at the core is the sense of pleasure that we anticipate we'll get from that item, that experience, that excursion. So it's like it's
desire.
What's that? Desire. It's not desire. It's the pleasure that we will get. The hisaneg. It's the pleasure that we will get, and that pleasure drives the desire to have it. So if you remember I don't know if you ever got caught. I got caught. I was very young and naive with one of those timeshare things. You're walking on the boardwalk in Durban somewhere, and we got caught. They said, come in and you're going to get this timeshare package and blah, 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 and you go and you have to sit and listen to their spiel, and then at the end you realize that nothing's for nothing. So why is it attractive? Because all you want is to be able to have the opportunity to have that pleasure once a year for 10 days or a week or whatever they're giving you. So we buy this stuff. But if it's something we have no pleasure in, it cannot entrap us. Now, every single person has pleasure in life. So it's inescapable. It's part of the human experience. Pleasure does not have to be hedonistic. Pleasure does not have to be base. Pleasure can be profound. For example, some people get pleasure out of very materialistic things. That's how they are. They're not sophisticated people. So what gives them pleasure? A nice piece of food or an enjoyable experience. Some people are more sophisticated than that. And what gives them pleasure is a very cultured musical experience. That's a much more advanced form of pleasure than stuffing our faces with a piece of steak. A person that sits there listening to the symphony and it really touches them, it's more sophisticated, but it's pleasure nonetheless. And it's material pleasure nonetheless. Some people get pleasure out of the intellectual process, understanding an idea, debating a concept, investigating, exploring, understanding, philosophizing. That's a much, much more mature form of pleasure than the person who's stuffing their face with a steak. But it's still a physical pleasure. The reality of human beings is that pleasure is a central part of the human experience. It's just a question of what is the source of our pleasure in life. Now, it's difficult for us to imagine. It's difficult to imagine that somebody could sit down to daven and that experience for them would be more pleasurable than our greatest bucket list item. It's difficult for us to imagine. Doesn't mean it's not true. Just because it's difficult for us to imagine. It's like the well-known Hasidic story about this group of Hasidim who wanted to travel to visit their Rebbe. And while they were going to go to the Rebbe, they had a particular question about, they had studied and learned something about angels, and they wanted to clarify something about the angels. So they were going to go to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe was going to explain to them this particular aspect of the angels. Or they were hoped, at least, that they'd get that answer. In order to get to the Rebbe, they had to hire a wagon and pay a wagon driver. The wagon driver was Ivan, the local peasant. And Ivan has only one interest in his life, and that is to be able to have another thing of vodka. So he does whatever he does to earn money, to be able to get vodka, to be able to put himself out of his misery, basically. So traveling on the way to the Rebbe, you've got Hasidim in the back of the wagon who are busy discussing this concept about these lofty angels, which they're preparing so that they can give a very clear version of their question to the Rebbe when they get there. So to them, this entire trip is about angels. You've got Ivan sitting in the driver's seat, who cannot wait to get there so he can get his few kopecks so he can go to the local pub and he can have his vodka. So for him, the whole trip is about the vodka. And the horses don't know anything about Rebbes and about vodka. And they only know one thing, that they've been trained that when they get to their destination, they'll be given hay. And that's what they care about. They're going to have the hay. So Hasidim tell the story and they conclude it with, just because the horses are horses, that does not mean that the angels are not angels. In other words, the horse cannot imagine that there's a life beyond hay, and Ivan cannot imagine there's a life beyond vodka, and that doesn't mean there isn't such a life. So for us, we know what drives our pleasure, and there's a whole long list, a whole array of things. For us, we can't imagine that a person could sit with a siddur in front of them for 2, 3, 4 hours completely immersed, and that would be the most pleasurable experience. We can't imagine. We imagine it might be a moving experience, a meaningful experience, a spiritual experience, but it's difficult for us to imagine that that would be a pleasurable experience and that that's the ultimate pleasure. And that's the tzaddik's reality. What is the pleasure of a tzaddik? Hashem. Anything linked to Hashem gives them a rush, gives them a feeling of satisfaction, gives them the thrill that we so desperately try to get from transient things that are constantly fleeting and letting us down. Now, when you hear that, wouldn't you like to sign up for this? Imagine you had that ability, that what really gave you pleasure in life was a connection to Hashem. Because all the other things that we get pleasure from, number one, they're temporary. Number two, you can't have too much of a pleasure because then it's no longer pleasurable. So when you sit down to have your favorite meal, you might have seconds, But by the time you get to the third portion, it's actually no longer pleasurable. It actually feels disgusting. You start to feel, uncomfortable. Now imagine your pleasure was God. That's what gave you pleasure. You know what that means? It means when you're learning Tanya, it's the most pleasurable experience that life could possibly offer. And then when you finish learning Tanya and you go home and you say the bedtime Shema, that is the most pleasurable experience that you could possibly have. And between here and getting home to say the bedtime Shema, whatever you're doing in the car, you find a way to connect it to Hashem. So you're going to listen to a podcast, you're going to sing a nigun, I don't know what you're going to do. Every part of your life, you can never get sick of it. There's no such thing as having too much learning, too much davening, too much experience of God. So who's in? Who'd like to have this experience? Who'd like to have this experience? Yeah, absolutely. Except what? It's not necessarily within range.
It's not like that.
It's not within range.
You're in a car.
I'm saying it's an ideal, but it's not within range. So that's what he's telling us, that we don't really have that degree of choice to choose to get pleasure from what a tzaddik gets pleasure from. That's why we can't just choose to be a tzaddik. We can't even necessarily work hard to become a tzaddik. Because a tzaddik is not an accumulation of things. It's not a series of acts. It's a changing of who you are, fundamentally. It's a completely different kind of human.
So would you say you just are a tzaddik?
Well, he hasn't said that. He hasn't said that. He says the choice is not kol kach. Not freely available. He hasn't written us off and said there's no way to be a tzaddik. Later on in this chapter, he's going to say there might be possibilities, which was actually the teaser for this evening, right? Can you have tzaddik moments, which we may or may not get to tonight? I thought we would, but, this is a game that doesn't necessarily work always according to expectations. But the point over here is to be able to choose, to be that kind of a person who has that kind of pleasure, not up to us. Not up to us. Try this at home. Try this at home. I'm serious. As an exercise. Whatever your absolute favorite food is, tell yourself you're never going to eat it again. Okay, you know what? Tell yourself you're not going to eat it for a month. Your absolute favorite food. It's not going to be easy. I don't even know if it's going to be possible. Every one of us has, certain things we say, I have to cut down. And there's certain things we always leave to the end of that list. I don't have to. Exactly. Give up broccoli. Give up broccoli. See if you could push yourself to give up broccoli, right? So the point is, and now you're telling me that I'm going to change my whole life. That's just one item. That's just one of my pet loves. You're telling me how hard it is to give that up. But somehow I'm going to give up all of the pleasures of the world in favor of the pleasure of Hashem. We don't have so much choice to be able to do this. It's not necessarily within range of the average person. And then the flip side, and is it necessarily possible that a person should really, really detest things which are against what Hashem wants? And he used in both cases the words emes, true pleasure from Hashem, and true abhorrence of other things. Not so simple. Let's try this. And I think we touched on this once before, but let's try it again. Let's say that there's a person who did not eat kosher for many, many years of their life, and now they decide that they're going kosher.
Never heard of such a thing.
Never heard of such a thing, right? Going kosher. Cold turkey. Right? Stopping treif, cold turkey. So now this person is keeping kosher. Is it realistic to expect that because they now keep kosher, every time they see their favorite restaurant, they feel sick?
Previous favorite restaurant.
I'm saying their previous favorite restaurant.
Probably the opposite.
On the contrary, every time those old aromas coming out of that restaurant, the memories that they have, the dishes that restaurant serve, that they wish somewhere in the world a kosher restaurant would come up with some kind of a viable alternative. Every single time you have that experience, what are you thinking? Oh, if only there was a way to work around this, right? You don't feel nauseous just because you walk past a place where once upon a time you used to eat and now you know it's not kosher. Because these concepts, the tainug, the pleasure that we have, is not something that you just switch off. It doesn't work that way. It's not how we designed. I'll go further than that. May not even be what's expected of us. We're not expected that just because we've changed or grown or adopted a particular religious practice, we're not expected to now feel sickened by how we used to be, maybe sickened at our choices, but not sickened by the item, if you know what I'm saying. Like I might be disappointed in myself that I went for so many years behaving in a particular way, which now I realize is not how I wanted to behave. But it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to feel sick by that particular item. What happened if you went to, like, a 5-star Michelin restaurant, and now you're kosher, so what are you going to say? Oh, Michelin, most disgusting thing. I don't know how they could ever put their name on it. It's ridiculous. It's not real. Whereas a tzaddik is that way. For the tzaddik, the minute it's not kosher, it's nauseating. Is that, and not only is that something that we can do, because bear in mind, very often the things that we think we can and the things that we think we can't do are only relative to where we are now, and at some point maybe we progress and we look back and say, gee, I used to think that was a big deal, and now look at me. That's possible. That's not what he's saying. The question is, are we even wired that way? Is it even expected of us? Is it expected of us that we have to turn around and feel disgusted by anything which is not aligned with what the Torah wants? Let's be honest, we find it difficult in today's world. We find it difficult to be disgusted by things that people should be disgusted by. Once upon a time, if you had to talk about, being barbaric and primitive and whatever the case is, once upon a time in ancient Rome, you know what they used to do for entertainment? They used to go watch people beat each other to death. So primitive. But I'm going to go watch MMA. I mean, to say even things that, like, in a civilized world maybe should be objectionable, and we're okay, it's good, it's fun, nobody really gets hurt. I mean, they get hurt, but they don't really get hurt. I was like, of course they get hurt. I'm saying, of course they get hurt. Of course they get hurt, right? So I'm saying, in our world, we're not even necessarily nauseated by nauseating things. So what do you think? We're going to be nauseated by things that just because the Torah said it. So the tzaddik is some.
I mean, like keeping Shabbos, I couldn't imagine not anymore.
Imagining is one thing. Do you feel when you are walking to shul on Shabbos and another Jewish person drives past in a car, does it make you feel sick?
No, but...
No, exactly.
No, but it's different. It doesn't make me feel sick that they are. I'm just saying, like, the thought of me doing...
100%. But that's not a tzaddik. Exactly. But that's not a tzaddik.
What is
A tzaddik, if there is something misaligned with what Hashem wants, it bothers him to the core of his being. He loses his appetite. Sees a Jew driving down the street, he loses his appetite. I don't have that problem. I'm sorry, I'm the rabbi and I don't have that problem. So,
Sorry, no.
What's that?
Just don't be a rabbi.
No, this is the tzaddik.
So the tzaddik could never have done bad.
Are you saying the tzaddik could have done? Of course the tzaddik could have done bad
So
things.
it's changed
The tzaddik, we have examples. We have examples
Probably
in
if
our...
you walked into a grill house, I mean, you're going to feel ick.
What do you mean? Why?
Well,
Why? Why do I have to? Let me ask you a question. Why do I have to feel gross because I walk into... I mean, not that I've ever walked into a grill house. Maybe if I walk in, then I'll know. But,
it's not RTGs. You'll appreciate the look. but you're not going to,
And the
all
smell?
those things.
What, is it going to smell disgusting? No, it's going to smell great.
Okay, fair.
Right?
I don't know.
So I'm saying, again, there's no expectation. It's not an expectation that I should walk in. And firstly, I can't walk into a non-kosher restaurant, right? But one of the reasons I can't walk into a non-kosher restaurant is because it's not an expectation that it should immediately put me off. It's an expectation that should be alluring, and therefore I should avoid it. Not that I'm ever going to say, oh, you know what? Nobody's watching. Today's the day. But the fact of the matter is that you don't walk into such a place and automatically feel put off by it. Maybe certain things, like a person who's never, from experience, never had shellfish. I look at it, it's like, why would anybody eat that?
Yeah.
Okay, but that's not because it's not because I'm so spiritual. It's not because I'm so spiritual. Just because I don't know, the whole creepy crawly thing just doesn't talk to me, But think about. I'll give you an example. Just to illustrate the point. For those of us who come from a Western background, there's certain foods that why would anybody eat this, right? And even if you don't come from a Western background, there's certain foods like in certain parts of the world maybe they're delicacies for us. So, for example, I'll give you a little example. For example, rabbit. Okay? So, I don't know where they do or don't serve. I'm saying I don't know where they do or don't serve. Sounds to me like a very European kind of thing to eat, right? think it's a very European thing. But I don't know. We have some European people on the Zoom. They can tell me. But I think it's certainly not something that's in our world necessarily. So you have in your mind, right, this picture. If you've never eaten, you have in your mind this picture. Who would eat that? I mean, it's like the hair and the ears and the. So imagine somebody who's never eaten chicken in their life. Never experienced. How are you going to eat that? With the feathers and the dirt and the like.
On this topic, Yaakov told us what people eat from the animals.
Okay, fine, exactly. But do you understand where I'm going with this? Just because you're used to something doesn't make you a tzaddik.
It can be cultural.
It's cultural. What happens if there's a particular kosher food? For example, there are kosher grasshoppers. Okay, we don't have the tradition any longer, and the Yemenites believe they do have the tradition. So somebody comes and says, this is a kosher grasshopper, you're going to eat it now. It's got nothing to do with holiness, it's got nothing to do with the tzaddik. Because I don't like the idea of a grasshopper. Because it's culturally outside of my reality. So that's the point. The tzaddik, it's not a matter of this is culturally disturbing or objectionable. The tzaddik's coming in the perspective, if this is not what Hashem wants, I find it personally disgusting. It's not for a show. It's not because the tzaddik wants to illustrate how dedicated he is to Hashem. It's real. It's real. It's as real to the tzaddik that, and here's the best illustration. You could have two pieces of beef side by side on a plate. This piece was shechted and kashered, and this piece was not shechted. They look identical. They were prepared in the same way. They were cooked to the same level. They have the same spices, the same marinade. The tzaddik looks at this one and says, beautiful. He looks at that one and he feels sick. You and I can't even tell the difference. In other words, the tzaddik would even feel that way, not having the information behind the piece of meat. That's how aligned the tzaddik is with Hashem. In other words, you have such closeness to Hashem, such pleasure from Hashem, that you can already detect when something's not aligned with Hashem. You don't even have to be told. What were you going to say?
Yeah, that was my question. It was like take wine that's been exposed, kosher wine that's been exposed and it's now not.
Right.
But the tzaddik be able to.
So there are quite a number of stories of tzaddikim in our history that illustrate this point. There's the well-known story of the Alter Rebbe had a very famous chassid who was a very interesting personality, a little bit of a... I have to be very careful how I say this, because his behavior was often a little bit more in jest, but he was far from a jester. He was a very deep, profound person called Reb Shmuel Munkus. So they tell a story that there was once a big Farbrengen. It was in the dead of winter. And you know how Farbrengens work. They only last as long as there's fuel. And there's two kinds of fuel. There's the liquid form and there's the solid form. You've got to have food and you've got to have l'chaim. The guys are sitting there and the food runs out. It's late at night, deep in the Russian winter. And they're starting to run out of food. And the local butcher walks in with a nice cut of meat and he says, this is a gift for the Farbrengen. Here you go. Enjoy. So Reb Shmuel Munkus, for whatever reason, he was in charge of kind of plating it and bringing it out to the Farbrengen. Which is interesting, considering what a great chassid he was. You wouldn't expect him to be the waiter at the Farbrengen, but this is what happened. So he brings in this tray of meat, and he's about to put it down on the table, and then he starts doing this little shtick. He's about to put it down, and then he takes it away, and everybody's, no, bring the meat, and he's about to put it down. And back and forth, and they're getting more and more agitated, and he's fiddling around with the food. And eventually, he walks over to the window and tosses it out the window into the snow, and everybody goes crazy. Now, Hasidim at Farbrengens in those days used to deal with things perhaps a little differently to how we do today. They took Reb Shmuel Munkus, they lay him on the table, they took a belt, and they gave him a few claps. So what is this? The Torah tells us you're not allowed to waste, and teasing people, and it's not on. Give him a few claps. Then they sit down and they carry on the Farbrengen. A while later, the door bursts open, and in comes this butcher in a frenzy, and he says, "Please tell me you haven't eaten the meat yet." And they say, well, as it happens, What's going on? He says there was a terrible mix-up, and this particular piece of meat that I brought actually was from one of the animals that we slaughtered today that we later discovered was not kosher. Had some problem with the lungs or whatever, it's not kosher. I gave you the wrong piece of meat. Please tell me that you haven't eaten it. So they said, well, as it happens, this is what happened. They take Rav Shmuel Munkus, they put him back on the table, and they hit him with a belt again. They say, what do you think you are? Some kind of a tzadik? That you're behaving with this, this kind of irrational behavior where you know things or whatever. So he says to them, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I'm not a tzaddik, and I'm not the son of a tzaddik. I just noticed that somehow in the middle of a farbrengen, which is such a spiritually invigorating experience, you guys were so excited about the meat. Something was wrong with that picture. You can't be at such a spiritual high and suddenly become so materialistic. Clearly, there was some energy at play over here that was not a healthy energy, and that's why I figured, you can't have this meat. I don't know, it's not kosher. I figured. But you see immediately that the idea that he was somebody who detected something wrong, that they immediately say must be a tzaddik. Tzaddik has that ability. And there are quite a number of stories. There's even a story, I can't remember which of the Rebbes it was with, where somebody deliberately wanted to feed them something that was not kosher, and they landed up not eating it. And they didn't have a reason not to eat it. There's even another story with not one of the Rebbes, one of the great Hasidim. I think it was Reb Hillel Parache, if I'm not mistaken. So he's somebody they called half a Rebbe. So he was clearly a tzaddik. He once arrived at somebody's house on Friday night, and he was literally bumping into the furniture, like as if it was pitch black. Nobody could understand what was going on. I mean, there were candles in the house. They couldn't understand. And on a little bit of investigation, they discovered that somebody had lit the candles once Shabbos had already started. So he couldn't see. Just couldn't. His brain couldn't process that light. It was as if the light wasn't there. So tzaddik is a whole different reality. It's a different technology. It's a different concept. And they draw their life, their excitement, their pleasure for Hashem. Can we do this? Not very easily. So nobody's saying over here it's impossible, because then there's no free choice. That was the point about free choice, right? Then there's no free choice if you say it's impossible. But it is fair to say that it is highly, highly unlikely. Therefore, let's just finish the sentence. Therefore, he tells us, therefore, the second part of the oath is, and now he is rephrasing it as, at least don't be a rasha. So the goal is be a tzaddik, and that should be our aspiration. And when you realize what a tzaddik is, and when you realize that it is beyond the scope of the average person, then you apply the second part of the oath, which is at least don't be a rasha. So right at the beginning I was saying, no, it doesn't sound like that. It is not saying it's second best. But the way we're explaining it now, there's still more. The way we're explaining it now is that it's if you are never going to reach the level of tzaddik because it's way beyond the average person, then the oath includes the fact that at the very least don't be a rasha. Now we have to analyze what that means in order to get a full picture of what this oath really is. And that's going to bring us back to the Beinoni and re-explain where that balance lies with the Beinoni, and then we can address the question of if it's possible to have tzaddik moments, which maybe I was a little ambitious to think we were going to cover this evening, and maybe at this rate we may not even cover it next week. I don't know, we'll have to see, but that's where we're headed.